All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today. This convergence has been a long time coming, and I'm really excited to have on board for this session James Aliberti and Mark Rose. And this session really was inspired by the beach cleanups that I was having with James at Candlestick Park through the pandemic. Zero Waste Youth had an opportunity to go out, do beach cleanups at Candlestick Park State Recreation Area, and just like all green spaces are very vital. And I just appreciate nature so much, especially during the pandemic. It was really important to get out, but like Candlestick Park specifically is like highly trafficked, and there's a lot of things that need to be done to keep the park viable for the people and the wildlife. So I'm really happy to have on board here these experts at the green spaces, keeping them viable, and they will share about their experience on what we need to do to combat park pollution and protecting the wildlife. And just that was a little bit about the session and how it was inspired, but a little bit about me before we get started with the speakers is my name is Bonnie, and I'm a Zero Waste Youth member since 2019. I love nature. Nature is my medicine, and it's just really important to me to have access to green space and protecting the ecology and the wildlife and all that is for our outdoor spaces. So I'll hand it over to James, our first speaker. I'll let him introduce himself and his topic today. So James, please take it away.
Okay, good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, thumbs up. All right, so my name's James Aliberti. I'm the State Park Interpreter 2 at Candlestick Point State Recreation Area in San Francisco, California. And the fascinating thing about this place is that it was formerly a dump. So if you ever have a park that gets the reputation of being a dump, then that's going to be something that's going to be really hard to get rid of in the future. So a lot of people who live in the local community or adjacent to the local community get the idea that I have a bunch of junk I need to get rid of. And instead of bringing it to the landfill and paying $60 a ton or doing something else with it, it's just easier somehow to bring it to the park and dump it in the park. So one of the biggest challenges we have is to tell people, give them the concept that this is a wetland, not a wasteland. This is a place for wildlife, for plants and animals, not for just dumping trash. I don't know, am I able to show some slides? Is it possible to show some pictures?
Yeah, I have your slides here, your pictures. And so if you just want to also, let's see, talk a little bit about like who you are and your position at Candlestick and like where is Candlestick? Just curious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. And then I'll refer to those slides too, because that kind of tells a little bit about that story. But what I do mostly is I teach people about the plants and animals in the park. As an interpreter, sometimes people say, oh, interpreter, what language do you speak? They don't understand the concept that we're interpreting nature. So there's a nature deficit disorder in America. There's a lot of kids who, when they walk out in the grass, they're like, oh, the grass is hurting my legs. Or they see some kind of an insect and they completely flip out. Whereas when I was a kid, I was like holding the insects and looking at them and checking them out and, observing them, and had little kind of like terrariums that I would set up for my grasshoppers, so it's really, really fun to take kids out into the park and show them the environment and everything like that. And sometimes we find creatures in the park that we can show kids, like alligator lizards or something like that. And that kind of connects them to the park because it shows them that there's animals that live in the park. So sometimes when people go out to the park, they don't know what they're looking at. They just see trees, they just see grass. And so as you are able to teach them and show them that these things are important, then they start connecting names to the animals, basic identification skills. Then they learn about their habitat, then they learn about their behavior, and then they become invested in these creatures and saying things like, I love lizards, I love snakes, as opposed to being afraid of them. And then they become stewards of the park. And as they grow up, they want to protect the park. So one of the biggest challenges we have is that the park's seen as a wasteland. And so we're trying to convince people that it's not a wasteland. It's not a place that you want to dump trash. We have tons of micro pieces of trash, little teeny pieces of broken glass and plastic and metal in the park. And those things are just kind of like inundated into the ground. And so we're always trying to remove that as much as we can. And we do a lot of cleanup days. So we have helper days on almost every Saturday. We also have a bird count that we do so people can get out and count the birds and get a sense of what kind of animals are living in the park. And we just run these programs in a way that where they're totally COVID safe. Nobody's ever really close to anybody else, but they're close enough to be able to talk and confer and sit down and have a little snack break together, but they're still basically 6 to 10 feet away from everybody else. They have masks on, they have gloves on, they're not sharing tools. So we've never had a case since COVID began where somebody said that they contracted COVID at one of our programs or at the park. And we've been asking a lot to make sure that that hasn't happened. And I think that's a key thing. If you want to have people volunteering in your park and helping out, they want to know that you're, no matter what kind of sense of humor you have or how fun you are and you want to sing and tell stories, you still have to make sure that your program is put together really well. It's very well organized. It's productive so that the people who are working feel like they're making a difference. And then you just really want to make sure you always thank people as much as you can, because we can't do any of these projects without people helping us. I mean, I can go out and pick up trash by myself, but having 30 people show up from Zero Waste Youth or from the San Jose Conservation Corps or any other place like that, it just multiplies the amount of material you're able to remove from the park. Do we have any of those pictures? I don't know if they're being shown and I can't see them, or
James, can you see the pictures?
no, let me scroll.
Emlyn, are you able to spotlight James as well as the presentation?
I believe the spotlight should be on. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, I see James is pinned and James is muted now.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, I can see the pictures now. Can you roll up one picture? Can you go to the first picture instead of the jackrabbits? Is it possible?
Yeah. Oh, it looks like it's backtracking instead.
Oh, no, picture.
1 second. It looks like it wants to go to do the one where you're holding the alligator lizard.
Am I muted, Mike?
You're
Can you
good
hear me?
now.
Okay, good. Okay, so in that first picture, you can see there's a youth and we found an alligator lizard. Now, we have to be really, really careful about using wildlife and plants as tools, right? I mean, you want to be really, really careful with the animals. So we love these creatures. We respect these creatures. This animal was found while we were digging out plants. And so it was going to get cut by a shovel or something. And so we pulled out this alligator lizard and I showed the kids the southern alligator lizard. It's a really cool animal. If you go to the next slide, we have jackrabbits in our park. There's 3 species in our park that are really of critical concern. It's the California ground squirrel, the gopher snake, and the black-tailed jackrabbit. And you say, well, none of those 3 species are endangered or anything, but actually in San Francisco City and County, these 3 species are only found in one place, Candlestick Point State Recreation Area. So the jacks are just an incredible benefit to the park. There's a lot of people that come to the park and tell me, you know, day after day, week after week, they've gone there looking for the jackrabbits, hoping to see them at some point. Next slide. And then this is people kayaking, and you can see in the background that giant structure that was from the naval shipyard. So we have a lot of not only the kind of pollution that we can pick up, but tons of toxins in our environment, heavy metals like lead, nickel, cadmium, selenium, copper. There's all kinds of chemicals. There's even radiation in the water. So that's something we really need to be careful about. The Navy is remediating the area over at Hunters Point, but you can see that people use the park for a number of different things, including kayaking. Next slide. And here are some people bird watching, and you can go to the next slide too. So the people that come to the park, they come for a bunch of different reasons. These are folks that came bird watching. You can see me in the background there leading a bird count. So we do a bird count once a month. If anybody who's watching this is in the local vicinity and wants to come, we're doing a bird count almost, it's almost the last Saturday of every month. It just depends if there's a holiday weekend. But we do it every month. I think we're on a 24th or 25th bird count coming up this month. And we have a lot of people that come to the park because they care about wildlife. And one of the easiest critters to see in the park are birds. And so that's a great way to introduce people to nature, is get them into birding, and then they get into plants, and then they get into insects, and then they get into butterflies. Next slide. And so that's kind of like the kind of thing that we encourage in our park. So you can see way in the background, I'm there pulling some weeds out, and then in the foreground, some of our helpers are seniors who are in their 70s, and they come out and they pull weeds and help out. And then some are like youth, like this kid who's probably, I think, was like 7 or 8 years old, had his own wheelbarrow and was going around helping us pick up the gazania, which is an invasive alien weed from South Africa that we're removing. And so next slide. It's just great to have people of all ages coming out and helping our park. You can see here, we're picking up heavy stuff. This is a helper. I'm pretty sure this is a Zero Waste Youth Day. Bonnie might even know this guy. And yeah, this is like removing this heavy material out of the waterway. Next slide. I know I only have like a minute left. There is picking up microplastics. That was, what was that? Was that with San Jose Conservation Co possibly? But that's, you know, you can say, well, that's only one bag of trash, but it's little teeny pieces of stuff that took forever because people are going through and sifting through, trying to get those microplastics out of our system, out of our environment. Just like the keynote speaker said, you know, that's the new plague on us, is plastic in our world, in our oceans, in our air, in our children. Kids have plastic in their systems when they're born, right? So we really need to find a way to get rid of plastics, especially single-use plastics, as fast as possible. I think last slide, last one. No, this is the second to last one. So sometimes we get stuff, not little microplastics dumped, but gigantic pieces of plastic. Look at this. This is like a boat that just got dumped in our park, got graffitied all over, and it will just break apart into pieces and ended up dissolving into little teeny micro piece of plastic that will go all over the place, unless somehow we can find an agency to pull that off. We don't have any boats at our state park. We don't have any way to handle things like that. So it's really challenging to get rid of large pieces of trash, and also the RV encampment that's outside our park that has like a huge amount of trash going from the RVs right into the park. Next slide. And someday we're hoping that the whole quality of life around the park and in the park will be at such a high rate that it will look pristine. There are places of the park that really look beautiful. And I want to encourage anybody, if you're ever in the Bay Area, please swing by Candlestick Point State Recreation Area, go for a bike ride, a walk out to the point. And it's a beautiful, quiet, serene place. It's an oasis in this urban environment. I think my time is up, so thank you so much. And I'll take questions at the end of the program.
Thank you, James. Yes, you're doing quite a lot at Candlestick, and great presentation. Thank you. And if y'all have any questions for James, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll have our volunteers collect those questions and we'll get those answered. And so Now I'm going to hand it over to Mark Rose, who is the Sierra Nevada Program Manager for the National Parks Conservation Association. And he is going to talk about the Yosemite Zero Waste Landfill Initiative. All right, Mark, I'll hand it off to you. Let me know, can you see the presentation? Can you?
Yeah, I can see it. Can everyone hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Mark Rose with National Parks Conservation Association. I just want to start off by thanking the Zero Waste Youth for hosting me. Really excited that you're having this conference and that I got an invitation. For anyone who's not familiar with NPCA, National Parks Conservation Association, we are a national nonprofit, membership-based, founded over 100 years ago, right after the Park Service was founded to be sort of the nonprofit outside partner of the parks. We're headquartered in DC, but have offices all over the country near all the major national parks, focusing on advocacy campaigns, lobbying, legal help, et cetera. Just whatever, both the National Park Service as a whole needs and also individual parks. And so I am the Sierra Nevada Program Manager based out of Sacramento. I focus on Yosemite, Sequoia, and Kings Canyon National Parks. And one of the main campaigns that I work on is the Zero Landfill Initiative. Next slide, please. So what is the Zero Landfill Initiative? It's actually, funny enough, an idea that was thought of and funded entirely by Subaru. They had gone zero waste at one of their factories, I believe in Indiana, a decade or so ago. And one of the executives who really pushed for that decided that they wanted to be able to scale it up and put it to good use at a more national level. So they reached out to the National Park Service to start this initiative at 3 pilot parks. There's Grand Teton, Denali, and Yosemite, which is how I got roped into working on this campaign. And the goal is really to, improve recycling and composting at our national parks, find a way to scale this up. And so far there's been, massive successes. It's going to be a long road to get to zero landfill at our national parks, but, we've been able to reduce waste by as much as 60 million pounds. Increasing recycling and composting by as much as 50%. It's hard to, this is a few years old. It's hard to know just in the last year or two with COVID and the parks being closed or greatly reducing visitation, but there's been a lot of really great success stories coming out of the parks. Next slide, please. So why reduce waste in our national parks? I think, most people have this image of our parks as being this, pristine natural wilderness that is focused on, sustainability and being green. But in reality, it's not the case at a lot of parks and in a lot of areas inside of our parks. Annually, NPS as a whole manages more than 70 million pounds of waste. In Yosemite alone, it's about 4,000 dumpsters worth of trash every year, which is about 10 dumpsters a day of trash from visitors all over the world coming into the park. We have this hope that parks can stand out as being these hubs of sustainability, but in reality, I'm sure it's the same situation with state parks and other public lands, national forests, et cetera. The National Park Service has been underfunded for many years. They've lost a lot of staff over the decades, and at the same time, that they've had these decreases in staff, there's been just a huge uptick in visitation and overcrowding in our national parks. So another thing that parks deal with is that they're mostly located in very rural areas, next to communities that often there's not a big population around. Often it's lower income communities. And so the infrastructure at the local landfills, at the local recycling facilities, despite having the big national park right next door, it isn't always great. So, you're dealing with outdated infrastructure, landfills that aren't able to fully, take in stuff like the propane tanks. The other problem is, you're getting visitors from all over the world, not just people who, are environmentally minded, but people who are just on vacation, or even people from Asia or Europe who are on tour buses and only in the park for, a couple hours, getting dropped off at, one or two spots to take a picture, dump waste, and then moving on. Something that early on the parks faced was just inconsistent labeling, people not knowing, what's recyclable, what's, they're trying to wish cycle. And so all of that has just contributed to massive waste stream issues and pollution, people littering in the park, et cetera. So we really view this as a unique opportunity to just focus on these 3 parks, figuring out what the problem is, how we can improve recycling and composting waste, and then hopefully one day scale it up to the whole national park system. There's been a lot of lessons that we've learned over the years. I think, not all of it can be transferred to all parks, but I think a lot of it can be, and hopefully one day we can scale that up. And so next slide, please. So there's been a lot of highlights at all 3 parks. I could go on for about an hour talking about all the different things, from in Denali, where they had this Zero Landfill Youth Ambassadors program that won national level awards and flew out all the kids involved to DC. Grand Teton, they did this awesome art project with the local school where they made these really cool sculptures out of waste and featured them in the park. But since I work on Yosemite, I'm going to be focusing on some of the main highlights in Yosemite National Park. Next slide. So I think there was a question in the chat here about the quantitative data and the amount of waste generated. That was really the first step in this process. So right when this initiative kicked off, we did waste audits at all 3 parks, looking at what was going into the landfill, even getting dirty and picking apart the trash, figuring out what was recyclable, what was compostable, and what is truly waste. So getting all of those figures, working with the Park Service, working with concessionaires, working with the local landfill, to just weigh all of those different, trash, recycling, or compost, to get that data. And then also just doing a sort of an audit of what was inside of the parks in terms of infrastructure and what was needed. I think, before this, as you can see, the common trash cans that you saw inside of Yosemite were these, they call them half dome style, outdated trash cans, not really great, not really bear proof, and not really placed in efficient areas for visitors to be able to conveniently throw stuff away. There was different kinds of labeling. It was all pretty confusing. So one of the very early on things that Subaru did was donate a lot of money to replace all these trash cans with hundreds of these really nice bear-proof recycling cans and trash cans, and figure out where the best place in the parks, where the most waste was being generated, where they needed to do it, and then also make sure that you were always putting a recycling can next to trash cans everywhere in the park. And some places these are expensive bear-proof trash cans. Some places it was costing as much as like $20,000 to get it up into the wilderness, but well worth it, because just from an infrastructure standpoint, we saw massive amounts of improvement in terms of waste reduction by just having trash cans in the right places and recycling cans next door. Another part of this was partnering with this organization, if you've never heard of it, Recycle Across America, whose goal is to standardize labeling and making sure that all the trash cans and recycling cans had all the same labels, which you can see here, making it as easy as possible, especially since a park like Yosemite gets so many foreign visitors that it's not just written recycling or trash on it. You actually have photos of what goes in each trash can, which is really important. Another thing that just recently happened from the infrastructure side was Subaru donated some money to replace the grinder for compost at the local landfill in Mariposa County. This was sorely needed. The existing grinder that they had was constantly getting clogged, and made it basically so that, despite the fact that there was a lot of green waste and compost going to the landfill, none of it was actually being composted. It was pretty much all being used for alternate daily cover, which is just what they cover their landfill waste with at the end of the day, so they can pile more on top. And so getting this new grinder will help us be able to scale up the composting program in the park and in the communities and the households around the park. We're already getting hundreds of households and restaurants and businesses to want to take part in this, and finally be able to make some real compost that can, hopefully be used in the community around the park. Next slide, please. So one of the, the big things that NPCA was brought on was just managing all of the different partnerships involved in this process. Of course, it's obvious, Subaru is the major funder and the major sponsor of this. They've been involved in the beginning, but also working with National Park Service, both nationally and all, the local parks, working from the funding side with the National Park Foundation, who deals with all the grants and then passes them on to organizations like the Yosemite Conservancy, who's the nonprofit partner of Yosemite. They have employees who they've hired to work specifically on this issue. One of the main issues that they've been working on is, what to do about these single-use propane tanks. I know Cameron from different organizations that we work together. She's really involved in trying to figure out a way to get rid of these propane tanks that people use, bring into the camps and use, and then just leave these tanks there. And there's not really much you can do with them. It's really hard to recycle them, and there are literally thousands of them piling up inside of all of the parks across the country. Another, big key partner is local businesses, whether that's, the hotels and restaurants outside of the park who can help out by, increasing their food waste and recycling and help out the local landfills. One of the biggest partners is the concessionaires in all of the parks in Yosemite. It's run by the parent company Aramark, and the subsidiary in the park is Yosemite Hospitality. And they own and operate all of the hotels within the park, all of the restaurants, all the tour companies, et cetera. So, they're by far the biggest generator of waste. They've got, hundreds or thousands of employees, and that's, a lot of the visitors coming in and making their way through the park are interacting with the concessionaire. So making sure they're a key partner in this, they're training their employees properly, they're doing everything they can do to make sure that the waste is making it to the landfill as clean as it can be. There's numerous nonprofits in addition to National Parks Conservation Association. We've been working from the beginning with Leave No Trace, who many of you probably know. They've been really valuable, just giving us lessons on best practices, doing research projects around waste in national parks and visitor attitudes towards recycling, et cetera. I also mentioned Recycle Across America, who's been great in donating and providing a lot of the labeling and lessons that they've learned through their work. Obviously, we have to work with the local landfill, which you can see here. They've been a great partner, but like I said, they're small rural county, Mariposa County landfill, taking all of the trash in the park as well as from inside of the county and the households and businesses there. So like many landfills across the country, they're underfunded, don't necessarily have the equipment to handle all of this, and so just partnering with them to make sure that they could have everything they need to be recycling and composting as much as possible, and meeting not only the goals of the Zero Landfill Initiative, but many of the state requirements around that. There's other partners like Recology, who takes some of the recycling from the park, as well as TerraCycle, who has helped us deal with some of the harder to recycle items like wrappers and stuff like that, which you find commonly for snacks that people eat in the park. And then another really awesome partner that we've been able to work with throughout the years is the Yosemite Climbing Association. If you haven't heard of it, there's an annual event named Facelift in Yosemite. It just unfortunately happened about 2 weeks ago, so you'll have to wait till next year if you're interested in it. But for going on 20 years now, they've had an annual cleanup in Yosemite which pre-COVID brought in over 2,000 volunteers. It's a really awesome event. There's camping. They have events at night where they bring in really some of the world's most famous climbers and present on, just climbing, and they clean up tons and like literal tons of trash every year, including just mostly microplastic, but anything from couches and mattresses to climbing ropes, etc. So if you ever have an opportunity, I strongly encourage you to look it up. It's a really awesome event. Next slide, please. And the last thing that's a really big part of this campaign, and in all three of the parks, is just sort of visitor education, staff education, doing outreach, for people coming from all over the world, entering in the park and hitting them in all those touch points before it and when they get into the park. Also educating, the local gateway communities, youth in and around the parks, and then even the staff and the employees of the National Park Service on the importance of, the Zero Landfill Initiative, how to recycle, what's recyclable in and around the park, etc. There's many different ways to go about this. Some of it's as easy as just like, signage, or working with park staff to ensure, good interpretation around it. One thing that all three parks have done is partnered with local education groups, whether it's nonprofits or schools. In Yosemite, we were lucky enough to be able to partner and provide some funding for the Nature Bridge, which is a nonprofit that brings thousands of kids from around the country for science-based outings. They'll take kids out, go camping, and teach them about different science in the park. We were able to partner and have, I think about 2 years ago, hired a few staff, including Nancy, who I think is on this in this meeting now, who did an awesome job going into local schools and teaching them about the Zero Landfill Initiative. Unfortunately, with COVID and in-person learning, we had to Nature Bridge quickly had to stop doing all of their different programming in the park. But they have been able to adapt and do some online curriculum. That's been awesome to see. But hopefully that's something that, as COVID subsides, we can get back into and do some more education with the youth in and around the park to help promote the Zero Landfill Initiative and hopefully reach our goal one day. Next slide, please. So yeah, that's all I have. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions about the initiative or how you want to get involved, please feel to reach out to me or check out our website here for more information about what's happening in all the different parks.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Awesome. Okay, well, let's open it up for questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and we can bring James to the forefront here. And let's check out if we have any questions here. All right. I do have a question here for Mark. Emlyn, it's okay. You can keep James pinned the whole time. So, Mark, can you describe the process you use to capture quantitative data on the amount of waste generated at the parks? I know you touched on it a little bit, but can you go through that again?
Yeah, so a lot of it's relying on our different partners like the Park Service and the concessioners to quantify their own, levels of waste that they're gathering. When they go to the landfill, they weigh all the waste that's going. They weigh all the landfill waste. They weigh all the recycling and they weigh all the composting. And so we've just been working with them from the beginning. At the very beginning of this, we did kind of a baseline figure to try to figure out, how much waste was coming from each different group. And so now every year, it's sort of a self-reporting based on that tonnage when they bring it to the landfill, and then also relying on the landfill to be able to help, keep track of all that numbers, because the landfill charges all those companies for it, so they keep pretty good records of it. We've also done, things like waste characterization studies where we'll dive into dumpsters and rip up all the trash and see what's in it, how much of it's, should be recycled, that's not getting recycled, et cetera, and compare that to the past to see if, some of our infrastructure and outreach and education efforts have been helping reduce, the amount of waste or recyclables that are getting into the waste stream.
Great. We have a question for James. James, are there any endangered species at the park?
That's a great question. We have species of concern, like burrowing owl and other ones that come through. We're a really important wintering waterfowl spot. So a lot of the bird species that we get are only seasonal. Like, for example, a lot of people think in the summer you'd have more species in the winter, which is true in most of the United States. But in San Francisco, we have way more species in the winter than we do in the summer. And we have tons and tons of waterfowl that really depend on the bay. It never freezes in San Francisco, so they always know they have a bay they can come to here. And so that's really important. But we're in an urban oasis. We're in this urban environment. Candlestick Point is the first urban state park in California. So unfortunately, anything that would have been endangered kind of already got pushed out of this area. If we can establish more pickleweed and Spartina, like cordgrass habitat, like salt marsh habitat, we could get Ridgway's rail or clapper rail, which was an endangered species and is now a species of concern, and salt marsh harvest mouse, which is an endangered species. But we don't have the right habitat for them right now. But that's a great question. There's tons of wildlife to see in this park, even if there's not endangered species.
Great, thank you. And I want to ask this question in relation to our theme, Come Back Greener, Come Back Stronger. I know the pandemic has caused us to really recalibrate our how we do things, whether it's we're working from home, or we may have lost a job, or we may have started our dream job. But I want to know from James and Mark, like, how has the pandemic impacted your work currently? If you can maybe be a little brief, high level, and then like, how have you reimagined your future going forward?
Well, really quickly, I can say that when the pandemic started, we were told that we couldn't have volunteers anymore. And so that's a huge problem because we depend on volunteers for so much. And I think I calculated that for every 1 hour of staff time that's done, there's like 13.1 hours of volunteer time done. So it really compounds how much trash we can remove. So we had to do what we refer to in state parks as workarounds. Instead of me having trainings where I had volunteers come in, I had to just have like helper days, zero waste youth days, conservation corps days, where a group comes in. They're not like official VIPPs, volunteers in parks who've gone through the training and all that kind of stuff. There are folks who come in on one day, they sign a COVID waiver. Again, we keep our COVID protocols extremely strict, and then that way we're still able to run our programs. So it has affected us in some ways, but it really hasn't stopped anything from happening, except for like indoor close proximity trainings and programs like that. But our park, we spend most of our time outside anyways. And so generally, I mean, we couldn't have big events, like we couldn't have parties and gatherings and those types of things, but we could still continue to do our bird counts and our volunteer cleanup days.
And is there anything going forward that, like, how have you reimagined, like any processes or anything, or like community engagement, like going forward because of like the pandemic?
Well, for example, we were going to have like an Earth Day event, which would have been like a big gathering, and we realized we couldn't do that because of the pandemic. So we switched it to a scavenger hunt, which means that each family would come at a designated time slot, be given a map, and then go out through the park to find all the little scavenger tables that are in the park. And each table would have like information and people at each table, and they would get a little stamp in their map showing that they made it to the scavenger hunt. So I mean, that's the thing that COVID does. That's the benefit of COVID, in a sense, is that you can reimagine the ways that you do things, and it makes you be more creative. It forced us to think of a way we could have an event without everybody clustered together, and then that was the genesis of the scavenger hunt. So when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. That's what we're doing. Anytime we get something like, oh, you have to wear a mask. Okay, well, let's find a fun way to wear masks. Like, and just make it like just still great for the community.
Great. Thanks, James. Mark, how would you answer that question or those questions?
Yeah, so I mean, personally, like many, I immediately when the pandemic hit have been working from home. We haven't been able to host our usual events, any volunteer events in the park, or even join some of the other events like Facelift, which last year was moved out of the park, and this year was scaled back greatly. And it was really a shame because we do have an annual ZLI meeting where we bring in people from all over the different parks, and I felt like we had a lot of momentum coming out of that meeting right when the pandemic hit. And unfortunately, right when that happened, we lost people like Nancy, who had been working in the park, teaching in schools and stuff like that, because of no in-person education. And so I think as a whole, part of the campaign took a step back. But at the same time, the park ended up closing for a while with COVID. When it came back, it had a reservation system. And so in some ways, there was wildlife returning to areas of the park where they hadn't been. There was less waste and less visitation in the park over that time. So it's been a little bit of, there's been some positives and some negatives. One of the big negatives, I think, is now that people have been coming back into the park, at least for a very long time over the last year, there were no in-person dining. So, there was a lot of the concessionaire giving out single-use plastics and stuff like that in the park. So despite having much less waste in 2020 and through the first part of 2020, just with less visitation, et cetera, the visitors who have been visiting have been getting much more single-use plastic and things that we wouldn't like to see in the park in the first place. So, there's been some small benefits of having less people in the park and providing a little bit of breathing space for some of the wildlife and others, and some more time to plan on stuff. But at the same time, we, as a campaign, having to take a big step backwards. So, right now we're still just trying to kind of pick up the pieces and get back into the momentum that we had leading right into the pandemic.
And Mark, in what ways is Subaru still involved with the initiative?
So from the very get-go, Subaru has been the main funder. This was sort of their idea. Well, I'm not gonna credit all of Subaru, but mostly the idea of one of their executives who's actually been a really good partner on this. As I'm sure many were kind of hesitant when you think of having a car company that, is especially siding with the Trump administration on some of their fossil fuel policies with vehicles and stuff like that. But I have to say they've been really good about not just using this as a greenwashing opportunity. In fact, they haven't even put Subaru labels or anything like that on any of the hundreds of trash cans and stuff like that. So really, they've been working behind the scenes. This one executive has been, she's on every call. She's in the park sifting through the trash with everyone. So, not only are they the main funder, but, this person who's sort of, dream this was from the get-go has been involved at every single level and is really the main person working closely with NPCA and others to help guide this. So they've been really closely involved, and I would have to say I'm not the biggest fan of corporate advertisement in national parks and stuff like that, but they've been really good about not just using this as a greenwashing opportunity, but actually seeming to really care about wanting to help out our park. So I'll credit them for that. And I don't even drive a Subaru, so I'm not paid to say this.
Thanks, Mark. It looks like we have time for one last question, and it's for James. You mentioned litter is a big problem at your park. Is there anything else that is an issue that you're seeing at your park as well?
Oh boy, yeah. So I want to sell the park on people. It's beautiful and it's great to come here, but you have to realize that we're in an urban environment, and this is very different than so many other parks you've ever been to. We have I was listening to what Mark was saying about his trash cans. We had open trash barrels from like the 1960s, right? And those would just get knocked over all the time. Trash would go all over the place, and animals would go through it. People would go through it. All kinds of stuff like that. So recently we got the bear cans where you have to kind of lift your hand inside, right, to open it and put it in. People don't know how to open the can. They leave the trash outside the can or on top of the can. And when they see me, they say, "Hey, where are the trash cans?" And I say, "That is a trash can. You're standing right next to one." And they're like, "Oh, it's locked. How do you open it?" And I'm like, "You have to slide your hand in." So there's a learning curve on all of this stuff for folks. But basically, we have all the urban problems that you would imagine. So we have drug use in the parks, especially like intravenous needles that we find in the park, and like pokey things that are very dangerous, medical waste. We have people starting fires in the park. Some of them are just people trying to cook or burn something else, and some are intentional fires that people just want to light the park on fire. We have prostitution happening in the park. Sometimes we have weapons. So being in an urban environment, you have to realize this is not your average nature park. But with that said, you saw in my slides, I have all kinds of kids coming to the park. We do all kinds of programs. But as far as waste goes, our biggest problem is people just like having a party at the park and leaving a bunch of bottles around, or showing up to the park and smoking a cigarette and then just throwing their cigarette butt on the ground. So we do have a lot of those kinds of problems. Those are all challenges that we face. And I see it as job security. That means they're always going to need me here, because I'm always going to have to be out there talking to people about not releasing their balloons into the air, or not, letting their fishing line get loose and be left as an entanglement issue for wildlife and all that kinds of stuff. So great question. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, James. Thanks, Mark. I'm going to cut it off here. I'm really excited that the session's recorded so that we can share this out on YouTube and all of our socials. And it looks like James left his email here in the chat. So definitely feel free to reach out to him, and that afterwards too, we can send out the contact information so y'all can learn more about the initiative, the Zero Waste Initiative at Yosemite, and then also get involved with James at Volunteer. And it looks like, Mark, thanks for your email, or your email there. And so, all right. And I also, if you go to our website, the program's there with the Zoom links. And thank you, everyone. This was a great session. I wish we had time for more questions, but
Please come to Candlestick. Please come to Candlestick. Pick up trash. Come bird watching with me. It's a great place.
Thanks, everyone. Feel free to hop off. This link is going to be open all day because we do have more sessions using this link. So, yeah.
Thanks all.